September 1965. The Blue Moon Club, Memphis, Tennessee. Johnny Cash was in the middle of performing "I Walk the Line" for an intimate crowd of about 200 people when something unusual happened. The audience, which had been completely focused on Cash's performance, suddenly shifted their attention toward the back of the room. People started whispering, pointing, turning in their seats. Cash stopped playing mid-verse, confused about what was causing the disruption. Then he saw him, standing in the shadows near the back exit, trying to be inconspicuous and failing completely, was Elvis Presley. What happened next became one of the most talked-about moments in Memphis music history. A story that those 200 people would tell for the rest of their lives, even though the moment was never recorded, never photographed, and remained almost unknown outside that small club. It was September 18th, 1965, a Saturday night in Memphis. The Blue Moon Club was a small venue on Beale Street, the kind of place where serious music lovers came to hear artists in an intimate setting. It held maybe 200 people if you packed them in tight, and tonight it was full. Johnny Cash was performing a rare small venue show, a return to his roots before heading back out on a major tour. Cash had specifically chosen the Blue Moon because it reminded him of the early days, before the big stadiums and television appearances. Here he could see every face in the crowd. He could hear individual voices singing along. It was pure, unfiltered connection between performer and audience. The show was going beautifully. Cash was in top form, his deep voice filling the small space, his band tight and responsive behind him. Meanwhile, across town at Graceland, Elvis Presley was having a restless evening. He'd finished filming earlier that week and had a few days off before his next commitment. He was tired of being cooped up in the mansion, tired of the entourage, tired of the careful management of every public appearance. He wanted to feel like a regular person for a few hours, to go out and experience music the way he had when he was younger. Elvis's friend, Red West, mentioned that Johnny Cash was playing at the Blue Moon that night. Elvis's eyes lit up. He'd known Johnny for years, respected him enormously, but their paths didn't cross as often as Elvis would have liked. Both were busy with demanding schedules, and their music had taken them in slightly different directions. But there was a mutual respect there, a recognition of each other's talent and authenticity. "I want to go," Elvis said suddenly. Red looked skeptical. "Elvis, you can't just show up at a small club like that. You'll cause a riot. Cash's show will get completely disrupted." Elvis shook his head. "I'll be discreet. I'll go in the back, stand in the shadows, just listen. Nobody has to know I'm there." Red knew this was unlikely to work. Elvis Presley being discreet in public was like trying to hide the sun behind a cloud. But he also knew that when Elvis got an idea in his head, there was no talking him out of it. So they came up with a plan. Elvis would dress casually, no flashy clothes, just jeans and a dark jacket. They'd arrive late after the show had started. They'd use the back entrance. Elvis would stay in the shadows near the exit where he could leave quickly if necessary. At around 9:30, Elvis and Red pulled up in an unmarked car behind the Blue Moon Club. They could hear Cash's voice coming through the walls, performing Folsom Prison Blues. Elvis smiled. That song always got to him. There was something in Cash's delivery, that lived-in quality that made every word feel true. They slipped in through the back door. The club was dark, except for the stage lights focused on Cash. Elvis positioned himself near the back exit, partially hidden by a support column. Red stood nearby, ready to run interference if anyone recognized Elvis. For about 10 minutes, it worked. Elvis stood in the shadows, completely absorbed in Cash's performance. He watched the way Cash commanded the stage with minimal movement, the way his voice carried such authority and vulnerability at the same time. He saw the audience hanging on every word, and he felt a pang of nostalgia for this kind of intimate performance. Then Cash started I Walk the Line. It was one of his signature songs, and the crowd was immediately engaged. Elvis was nodding along, his foot tapping to the rhythm. Then something shifted in the room. Elvis wasn't sure what caused it at first. Maybe someone leaving the bathroom had noticed him. Maybe a server walking past had done a double take. Whatever it was, a ripple of recognition started spreading through the crowd. People in the back rows started whispering to each other, then turning to look. Then the people in front of them noticed the commotion and turned too. Within 30 seconds, a significant portion of the audience was no longer watching Johnny Cash. They were staring at the back of the room where Elvis Presley was standing, trying desperately to blend into the shadows and failing miserably. Johnny Cash noticed the shift immediately. He was a professional who'd performed thousands of shows, and he could read an audience's energy. Something was wrong. People were distracted, looking away from the stage. He stopped playing mid-verse of I Walk the Line, and the band stumbled to a halt behind him. "What's going on back there?" Cash asked, squinting into the darkness beyond the stage lights. More heads turned. More whispers. Cash stepped forward to the edge of the stage, using his hand to shield his eyes from the light so he could see into the crowd better. That's when he saw him. Even in the shadows, even trying to hide, Elvis Presley was unmistakable. The profile, the distinctive hair, the way he carried himself. Cash blinked, not quite believing it. Then a slow smile spread across his face. What Johnny Cash said next would be repeated by everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. He pointed toward the back of the club and said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "Ladies and gentlemen, the king just walked into my show." The crowd erupted. People stood up, craning to see Elvis. Some started applauding. Others were calling out to him. The intimate atmosphere of the small club had suddenly become electric with a different kind of energy. Elvis, caught in the spotlight of attention, raised a hand in acknowledgement, but stayed where he was. He looked almost embarrassed, like a kid who'd been caught sneaking cookies. Cash was still smiling, but now he was gesturing for the crowd to settle down. "Now hold on," Cash said. "We can't have the king of rock and roll standing in the back like he's trying to sneak out of church early." The crowd laughed. Elvis shook his head, pointing at Cash as if to say, "This is your show, keep going." But Cash wasn't having it. "Elvis Presley, you get yourself up on this stage right now, or I'm coming back there to get you." The crowd cheered. Elvis hesitated. This wasn't what he'd wanted. He'd come to listen, not to disrupt Cash's show, but the crowd was already chanting, "Elvis! Elvis! Elvis!" And Cash was standing there with his arms crossed, waiting. Elvis made his way through the crowd toward the stage. People reached out to touch him as he passed, calling his name, asking for autographs. Elvis smiled and nodded but kept moving, clearly uncomfortable with disrupting the show. When he reached the stage, Cash extended his hand and pulled him up. The two men stood face to face for a moment, and then Cash pulled Elvis into a quick hug. "What are you doing here, man?" Cash asked, his microphone picking up the question. Elvis laughed. "I just wanted to hear you sing, Johnny. I didn't mean to interrupt." Cash shook his head. "You didn't interrupt anything. You just made this the most interesting Saturday night These folks are going to have all year. The crowd was going crazy now. Here were two of the biggest names in music standing on a tiny stage in a small Memphis club, talking like old friends. Cash turned to his band. "Boys, I think we need to adjust the set list. You know that's all right?" The band members grinned and nodded. Of course they knew it. It was one of Elvis's first hits, recorded right here in Memphis at Sun Studio over a decade ago. Elvis looked shocked. "Johnny, you don't have to." Cash cut him off. "I want to. Been wanting to sing this with you for years. Never thought I'd get the chance in a place like this." He handed Elvis a guitar. "You remember how to play this thing?" Elvis laughed and took the guitar. "I think I can manage." What happened next was magical. Cash and Elvis launched into "That's All Right," and the small club was transformed. Here were two giants of American music playing together in an intimate space, feeding off each other's energy. Cash's deep voice and Elvis's higher tenor blended in a way nobody had heard before. The band was grinning ear to ear, clearly thrilled to be part of this spontaneous moment. The audience was mesmerized. People later said it was like watching two master craftsmen at work, each bringing something unique but complementary to the performance. Elvis was moving more than Cash, his natural stage presence taking over. Cash was more grounded, solid as a rock, providing the foundation for Elvis to soar over. When the song ended, the crowd went absolutely wild. People were on their feet, screaming, applauding, crying. Cash and Elvis stood there, both breathing hard, both grinning like kids who'd just gotten away with something. "That was fun," Cash said. "We should do that more often." Elvis nodded. "Anytime, Johnny, anytime." Then Cash did something that surprised everyone. "You know what? This is your town, Elvis. Memphis is where you started. I'm just visiting. You want to finish the show?" Elvis immediately shook his head. "No way. This is your night. I'm just happy I got to be here." Cash studied Elvis for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but you're staying up here. I'm not doing the rest of this show without you." For the next hour, Johnny Cash performed the rest of his set with Elvis Presley sitting on a stool at the back of the stage. Elvis didn't sing on every song, but he was there, present, occasionally adding harmony, sometimes just listening. And the dynamic it created was incredible. Cash performed at the height of his powers, perhaps energized by having someone he respected so much watching him work. Elvis, free from the pressure of being the main attraction, could just appreciate the music. They did a few more songs together, "Blue Moon of Kentucky," a song both of them had recorded early in their careers, "Peace in the Valley," a gospel number that brought the house down, and finally, "I Walk the Line," again, the song Cash had been performing when Elvis arrived. This time, Elvis sang harmony, and the song took on a whole new dimension. At one point during the show, Cash told a story about the early days at Sun Records, when he and Elvis were both trying to figure out who they were as artists. "We were both scared kids," Cash said. "Didn't know if we had what it took, didn't know if anyone would care about our music. But we had each other. We had Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, all of us trying to make something new, something real." Elvis added, "Johnny was always the most authentic one of all of us. He never tried to be anything he wasn't. I always respected that." The mutual admiration between them was obvious and genuine. These weren't two competitors trying to one-up each other. These were two artists who understood each other, who recognized the lonely space at the top and appreciated having someone else who understood what it was like. When the show finally ended, Cash, and Elvis stood together at the front of the stage, arms around each other's shoulders, taking in the standing ovation. Then, as quickly as he'd appeared, Elvis slipped backstage and out the back door. He signed a few autographs for people who'd followed him out, posed for a couple of photos, and then he was gone. The remarkable thing about this story is how little documentation exists of it. This was 1965, before cell phones and social media. The club didn't have professional recording equipment set up,